Before America had police, before it had prisons, before it had laws strong enough to restrain evil, there was the frontier. A vast, dark wilderness stretching westward, where roads were little more than scars in the dirt. Where cabins stood alone for miles, and where death could arrive without warning, and vanish without consequence. In this untamed land, something moved quietly, not an army, not a tribe, not a war, but two men. Two brothers. They traveled with women and children, they posed as poor settlers, they asked for food, shelter, and kindness, and when their victims turned their backs, the Harpe Brothers killed them. They kill men, women, travelers, families, and even infants. They murdered not for money, not for revenge, not for survival, they murdered because they wanted to. Between 1797 and 1799, their trail of blood stretched across Kentucky, Tennessee, Illinois, and the Ohio frontier, leaving behind bodies dumped in rivers, skulls crushed beside forest paths. And a terror so deep that hardened frontiersmen refused to speak their names aloud. Their names were Micajah Big Harpe and Wiley Little Harpe. History would remember them as America's first serial killers. But before they became monsters, they were born into a nation already soaked in blood. Were the Harpes born this way? Or shaped by war and chaos? Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. Before we begin, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The American Revolution had ended, but peace never truly arrived. The war left the frontier broken. British loyalists fled west. Displaced families followed rivers into unknown lands. Veterans haunted by violence carried muskets instead of plows. There were no sheriffs, no standing courts, no organized law enforcement. Justice came from the barrel of a gun or the knot of a rope. Travelers vanished without explanation. Cabins were found abandoned, fires cold, food untouched. Sometimes there were signs of struggle, sometimes there were only bones. This was a land where a man could kill and disappear into the trees. For predators, the frontier was paradise. Micajah Harpe was born around 1768 and Wiley Harpe followed shortly after. Their birthplace, North Carolina, was already boiling with violence. Their childhood unfolded during the most brutal years of colonial rebellion. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Families were torn apart by loyalty to the crown or the colonies. The Harpe brothers chose the losing side, they became British loyalists. But not soldiers, they were raiders. They robbed patriot homesteads, burned farms, kidnapped settlers, and killed without hesitation. The war trained them well and taught them that power came from fear. That life could be taken without consequence. That cruelty was a tool. When the revolution ended in 1783, the Harpes did not return to normal life. They didn't know how, because peace offered them nothing. Violence was all they understood. After the war, former loyalists like the Harpes were hunted, so they fled west into Kentucky and Tennessee. Here, the frontier erased reputations. No one asked who you were, only whether you survived. The Harpes joined criminal bands, they stole horses, they ambushed travelers, they learned how to disappear, and slowly, something changed. Robbery became optional and murder became entertainment for them. The Harpes did not travel alone. They took women, some wives, some captives, some coerced companions. They had children. To the outside world, they looked like desperate frontier families. But behind closed campsites, terror ruled. Witnesses later described the women as silent, bruised, and obedient. The children learned early not to cry because crying meant death. The first confirmed murders occurred along wilderness trails. A traveler would offer help. A farmer would give food. A family would share a fire. And when night fell, a knife flashed, a club swung, a body collapsed into the dirt. Victims were found with throats slit ear to ear, skulls crushed by blunt force, bodies stripped and dumped into rivers. Often, nothing was stolen, and that disturbed people the most. Frontier killers usually had reasons: land disputes, revenge, money, but the Harpes had none. They killed people who trusted them, they killed people who helped them, they killed people simply because they could. Rumors spread fast. A family of killers moves through the woods. They leave no one alive. They kill children. Fear outran facts, but the truth was worse. At one camp, a baby cried. The Harpes were hiding from pursuers, the crying threatened them. Micajah Harpe picked up the infant, and smashed its head against the tree. Witnesses would later say the sound echoed through the woods. The body was thrown into the river. Another infant was killed days later. These acts horrified even hardened frontier criminals. The Harpes were no longer thieves, they were monsters. By 1798, militias began forming. Settlers armed themselves. Taverns warned travelers. The name Harpe became a death sentence. The brothers were hunted, but the wilderness protected them until it didn't. By late 1797, the Harpe brothers no longer hesitated. Murder had become routine, as ordinary to them as eating or sleeping. They did not argue about whether to kill, they argued only about how. A knife was quieter, a club was faster, and river erased evidence. Each death sharpened their confidence. Each body left behind taught them something new. They learned how long blood took to darken. How sound carried through trees. How fear froze people before they could scream. The frontier had become their classroom. Travelers who encountered the Harpes often lowered their guard. The brothers traveled with women and children in a calculated disguise. To settlers, they appeared exhausted, starving, harmless, and they told stories of loss, of farms burned during the war, of children who needed food. Kindness was answered with death, men were lured away from campfires, women were struck from behind, and children were silenced quickly. The Harpes understood something terrifyingly modern: people trust those who look like them. As the killings continued, witnesses began noticing something disturbing. The Harpes didn't rush, they watched. Victims were sometimes wounded first, then finished slowly. Micajah, the elder brother, showed particular cruelty. He laughed after the killings, mocked dying men, and bragged openly when he thought no one would survive to repeat it. Violence had stopped being a means to an end. It had become a pleasure for him. The Harpe brothers fit every definition of psychopathic serial killers. They showed no remorse, no empathy, no emotional attachment, even to their own children. They killed infants not out of rage but convenience. Crying was noise, noise was risk, so they eliminated it. To them, life was an obstacle or a toy. Exact numbers will never be known. The frontier did not keep records. Bodies decomposed. Rivers carried evidence away. But historians estimate 20 to 40 murders, possibly more. Some victims were never found. Some were discovered months later, bones scattered and skulls crushed. Each discovery added to the legend and to the fear. The Harpes began haunting the Natchez Trace, a vital frontier road. It was crowded with traders, farmers, migrants, veterans returning home, which made it a perfect hunting ground. People disappeared along the trace. Those who survived spoke of a family that felt wrong, of eyes that watched too closely, of smiles that came too easily. Some refused to camp near families after that. Frontier criminals were not moral men, but even they had limits. When word spread of infant killings, other outlaws refused to work with the Harpes. They were unpredictable, excessive, and dangerous even to allies. Violence without rules is uncontrollable. The Harpes became isolated, and isolation breeds desperation. As militias formed, the Harpes felt the pressure closing in. They moved constantly, they slept lightly. Micajah became increasingly erratic, prone to rage, suspicion, and impulsive killings. Wiley followed, but even he seemed uneasy. They were no longer hunters, they were being hunted. The killing that sealed their fate was particularly brutal. A man was murdered near a settlement, and his body was discovered quickly. Witnesses saw the Harpes nearby. For the first time, there were descriptions and names. Militia leaders took action. This was no longer a rumor, it was a war. Men gathered with rifles and horses. They swore oaths: no trial, no mercy. The Harpes would be stopped or killed. The wilderness that once protected them was about to turn against them. The frontier had tolerated violence before, but it would not tolerate monsters. By early 1799, armed possessions began forming across Kentucky and Tennessee. Farmers left their fields, hunters loaded their rifles. Former soldiers recognized the signs of a coordinated pursuit. This was not vengeance, this was extermination. The Harpe brothers were no longer criminals to be arrested. They were threats to be erased. For years, the forest had protected the Harpes, now it betrayed them. Trails were watched, river crossings guarded, cabins warned each other with whispered signals. The Harpes felt eyes everywhere. Micajah grew reckless. He killed faster, moved sloppier, and left evidence behind. Fear was replacing control. The women traveling with the Harpes sensed the end, so they spoke less and moved slower. Some later claimed they feared the brothers more than the possessed. They knew escape was impossible. The children trained into silence watched everything, and they learnt that even monsters could be afraid. Near the banks of the Tennessee River, the Harpes attacked again. This time, witnesses survived. A man escaped wounded. He described 2 brothers, traveling with women and children, cruelty without hesitation, and the description matched rumors perfectly. The posses now had certainty, and certainty is deadly. The pursuit was relentless. Militias split into smaller units. They followed tracks, read broken branches, noted disturbed earth near campsites, and veterans recognized patterns from war. The Harpes were being hunted by men who knew how to kill. During a skirmish near a creek, gunfire erupted. Micajah was hit. The bullet tore into his body, not fatal, but crippling. Blood soaked his clothes, movement slowed. For the first time, Big Harpe could not run. The brothers fled deeper into the wilderness. Micajah weakened by the hour. Fever set in. He knew the truth: capture meant torture or death. There would be no mercy, the frontier had decided. Supplies ran out. Micajah could barely stand. Wiley faced a choice: stay and die together or flee and survive. The bond between the brothers was tested. They camped under cover of darkness. Micajah spoke openly for the first time, not of regret but of rage. He cursed the frontier, the settlers, the war that made him what he was. There was no apology, only bitterness. At dawn, Wiley left. He did not look back because he knew Micajah was finished. The elder Harpe was now alone, bleeding, weak, and surrounded. The posse found him hours later. Micajah tried to flee. He collapsed. The men dragged him from the brush. This was the monster whispered about for years, and he looked small. There would be no court, no judge, no delay. Frontier justice moved swiftly. The men remembered the bodies, the infants, in terror. Micajah Harpe was sentenced where he stood. The men who captured Micajah Harpe did not cheer, they stared. This was the figure who had haunted the frontier, the name spoken in whispers around fires. Now he was bleeding, and weak, but no one felt sympathy. They saw only the bodies he left behind. There were no ropes prepared, no courthouse nearby, and no intention of waiting. The frontier did not believe monsters deserved process, only endings. Micajah Harpe did not beg. Witnesses said he cursed. He ranted about injustice, about settlers who deserved what they got, and about a world that betrayed him. Even at the end, he felt no remorse. They forced him to the ground. One man held his arms and another pinned his legs. A knife was drawn. There was no ceremony, no prayer. The blade cut deep. Micajah Harpe was beheaded where he lay. The killing was quick, and the silence afterward was heavier than the violence. The men were not finished. They severed the head completely with eyes still open and mouth frozen mid-curse. They mounted it on a wooden spike along the Natchez Trace. A road traveled by thousands. A message carved in flesh. Travelers stopped, some vomited, some prayed, some turned back. The location became known simply as Harpe's Head. A place where the frontier spoke clearly: this far and no farther. For years, parents warned children about that road, about what happens when evil walks too freely. Many believed it was over. One brother died, the terror ended, but they were wrong. Because Wiley Harpe was still alive, and he had learned something crucial. He had learned how close death could come. Wiley disappeared into the wilderness. He changed his name, changed his appearance, and changed his story. The frontier swallowed him once more, but the violence did not end, it only evolved. Stories spread fast, some exaggerated, some softened, but the truth endured. A man so dangerous that his head became a landmark, a warning, and a boundary. The frontier had killed one monster, but it had not cured itself. There was no trial record, no confession transcript, no final accounting, just a head on a spike. Justice was delivered, but at a cost. It hardened the frontier, it taught men that mercy was optional, and it left unanswered questions about how evil is born. While one harp was gone, the other was learning, adapting, and becoming something new. When Micajah Harpe's head was mounted along the Natchez Trace, Wiley Harpe was already gone. He did not mourn, he did not return. He understood something instinctively: survival now depended on invisibility. The frontier had learned his name, so he erased it. Wiley Harpe became John Seton. It was not uncommon, men vanished and reappeared under new names every day. The frontier did not ask questions, that silence saved him for a while. Seton drifted south and west, eventually falling in with river pirates and outlaw bands along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. These men were killers, smugglers, thieves, murderers, but even among them, Seton stood out. He was quiet, watchful, cold, and he had learned restraint, not mercy. Wiley had watched his brother die, he watched how recklessness invited death. So he adapted, he killed less openly, left fewer witnesses, chose targets carefully. Violence was still there, but disciplined. Evil had matured. Seton joined criminal networks that included some of the most feared men on the frontier. River gangs, highwaymen, bandits who ruled stretches of water and road. He fit easily among them because murder was still easy for him. But history has weight. Seton drank, and when he drank, he talked, he bragged, he hinted, he described killings with too much familiarity. Men began to notice, no one survives the frontier without leaving traces. Someone finally connected the dots. The stories, the scars, the way he spoke about death. John Seton was Wiley Harpe, the last brother and the last monster. He was arrested not as a legend, but as a criminal. There was no escape this time. No wilderness wide enough, no brother to shield him. He expressed no remorse, no apology, no confession. This time, there was a court, a trial, and witnesses. The world had changed just enough, and Wiley Harpe could not deny who he was because the evidence followed him. In 1804, Wiley Little Harpe was hanged. No spectacle, no spike, just a rope. The rope tightened, and America's first serial killers were finally gone. The last Harpe died quietly, but his crimes did not. The frontier exhaled, travel resumed, families settled, but something had changed. People had learned what human beings were capable of without law, without restraint. The Harpe brothers were not myths, they were warning. They proved that serial murder did not require cities, or modern times. It only requires opportunity and chaos. No graves were honored. No descendants celebrated their names. History remembered them for one reason only: they killed without reason. When the Harpe brothers walked the frontier, the term serial killer did not exist. There were no profiles, no language to explain evil without reason. Violence was explained away as war, or poverty, or desperation, but the Harpes did not fit. They killed when they didn't have to. They killed those who helped them. They killed children. That distinction matters. The failure of early America happened because America was young and its systems were incomplete. The Harpe brothers exploited those gaps. There were no coordinated manhunts until it was too late. No shared records, until bodies accumulated. No prison strong enough, until justice became lethal. Their story reveals a hard truth. The nation learned how to protect itself by watching people die first. The Harpes were America's first known serial killers, but they were not the last. The forests were cleared. The roads were built. The nation grew. But the blood soaked into the soil did not disappear. Because before America had laws strong enough to stop monsters, It had the Harpe Brothers, and they showed the world what happens when evil walks unchecked through open land.